Kale Draven, an elite fighter, crash-landed on a strange planet. He was alone until he met her. Sira, a mysterious woman who commands the wild. The planet knows them. It's pulling them together for a reason they don't yet understand, but you will. Stay with me, and let's uncover the truth together.
The hum of Argos 9's engines vibrated through Kale Draven's bones as the sleek vessel pierced the void, streaking toward the uncharted edge of the galaxy. He adjusted his visor, eyes locked on the glowing dashboard, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. At 26, he was already a legend among the elite cadets, sharp-witted, impossibly fast, and cursed with a knack for cheating death in ways no one could explain. This mission was supposed to be routine: scout a newly detected planet, log its stats, and head home. Dara V shimmered on the horizon, a murky orb cloaked in violet haze, whispering promises of the unknown. The crew buzzed around him, voices steady but edged with that quiet thrill every explorer knows. Then it happened. Without warning, the ship lurched, lights flickered, and a wave of static drowned the comms. Kale's stomach twisted as the controls seized, and before anyone could react, the universe folded in on itself. He came to with a gasp, sprawled across damp, pulsing ground that smelled of iron and rot. His helmet was cracked, his crew nowhere in sight. The air hung thick, heavy with the drone of unseen life. Towering trees loomed overhead, their bark glistening like wet flesh, branches swaying without wind. Kale stumbled to his feet, every instinct screaming that this wasn't just a crash, this was something else. Dara V wasn't a planet, it was alive, watching him through 1,000 unseen eyes. He reached for his comms, but the device hissed static, useless. Alone, or so he thought, until a shadow darted through the undergrowth, too fast, too deliberate. His hand flew to his sidearm, but before he could draw, a figure emerged and time seemed to stutter. She was tall, her skin a shifting mosaic of amber and shadow, eyes like twin moons cutting through the gloom. Sir. That's what she'd call herself later, though at first she didn't speak, just stared, unblinking, as if peeling back his skull to see what made him tick. Kale's training kicked in. He squared his shoulders, weapon half raised, because everything he'd ever learned told him she was the enemy. Her kind, whatever they were, had been wiped out by humanity decades ago, their worlds torched in the name of expansion. Yet here she stood, alive, unbroken, and radiating a presence that made the air hum. She didn't attack. Instead, she gestured, a sharp, fluid motion, and the ground beneath him shuddered, vines snaking back as if obeying her silent command. He didn't trust her, not yet, but when a low growl rumbled from the dark and something massive shifted in the trees, he realized she'd just saved his life. They moved together after that, uneasy allies bound by survival. The forest was a maze of teeth and whispers, its canopy blotting out the sky, leaving only slivers of sickly light. Sira led the way, her steps silent, her gaze darting to places Kale couldn't see. She didn't talk much, but when she did, her voice carried an echo like it wasn't just hers. "This place remembers," she said once, her words curling around him like smoke. He didn't understand, not then, but he felt it, the weight of something ancient, something that knew him before he'd ever set foot here. His questions piled up. Where was his crew? What had happened to Argos 9? Why was this planet fighting to swallow him whole? Sira offered no answers, only riddles. "Time bends here," she murmured, brushing her fingers across a tree that pulsed in response. "What you seek is already lost." Days bled into nights, or maybe it was the other way around. Time didn't hold steady on Dara V. Kale's mind raced, piecing together fragments. The anomaly that hit the ship, the way the stars had vanished, the eerie sense that every move he made was being catalogued. Sira seemed to know more than she let on, her eyes flickering with glimpses of things he couldn't grasp. She'd freeze mid-step, head tilted, as if listening to a song he couldn't hear, then pull him down just as unseen claws slashed the air where he'd stood. Predators lurked everywhere, shapes that melted into the shadows, their growls vibrating through the earth. But it wasn't just the creatures hunting them, the planet itself twisted against them. Roots erupted from the soil to snare his legs, mist thickened to choke his lungs, and once, a river reversed its flow, dragging him under until Sira hauled him out, her grip iron strong. He started noticing her quirks, the way her skin shimmered when she was angry, how she traced patterns in the air that made the forest hush. She wasn't just surviving here, she was part of it, woven into its rhythm like a thread in a tapestry. "You're not like the others," he said one night, crouched by a fire that burned without fuel. She didn't look at him, just stared into the flames. "Neither are you," she replied, and the weight of her words sank into him. He'd always been different, too quick, too lucky, scars healing faster than they should. His superiors called it grit, his enemies called it unnatural. Now, stranded on this living nightmare of a planet, he wondered if there was more to it. Their fragile truce deepened as the threats grew stranger. They stumbled into a clearing where the air crackled, and for a moment, Kale saw Argo's 9, or its ghost, hovering above the trees, whole and gleaming, only to vanish when he blinked. Syrah grabbed his arm, her touch electric. "Don't chase it," she warned. "It's a memory, not yours." Her words gnawed at him. A memory? The planets? He pressed her, but she clammed up, her face tightening. That's when he saw it, a flicker of fear in her eyes, not of him, but of something bigger. "We're not alone," she whispered, and the hairs on his neck stood up. He'd felt it too, the sensation of being watched not by the forest, but by something colder, sharper, awake in the dark. The deeper they went, the more the planet unraveled. Time looped in jagged bursts. One minute they were running from a swarm of buzzing, needle-toothed flyers. The next they were back at the crash site, staring at his own cracked helmet like it hadn't moved. Syrah navigated it like she'd lived it before, her movements precise, almost rehearsed. "You've seen this?" he accused, voice rough. She didn't deny it. "I see what was, what is, what might be," she said, her tone flat but her eyes alive with something he couldn't name. "You're here because you have to be." It wasn't an answer, but it lit a spark in him. Why? What did she know? He grabbed her wrist, demanding more, but the ground quaked, splitting open to reveal a chasm that glowed faintly blue. She yanked free, pulling him back just as tendrils of light reached for them, hungry and alive. They kept moving, driven by questions neither could fully voice. Kale's mind churned, his DNA, his past, the way Syrah looked at him like he was a puzzle she'd already solved. She dropped hints, crumbs of truth. Daravi wasn't just a planet, but a cage built by hands long gone to trap something vast. "It's waking," she said once, her voice barely audible over the wind that howled without source. He didn't need to ask what it was. He felt it in the tremors, the sudden silences, the way the shadows stretched too long. Whatever slept here was stirring, and they were caught in its gaze. Syrah's connection to the planet ran deeper than she admitted. Her blood seemed to hum with it, her every step a dance with its will. And Kale? He was the outsider, the anomaly, the key she needed but didn't trust. Trust was a razor's edge between them. He caught her watching him sleep, her fingers hovering over his chest like she could pull something out of him. "What am I to you?" he demanded, voice low. She didn't flinch. "A spark," she said simply and turned away. It infuriated him, but he couldn't shake her. Not when the forest parted for her, not when she dragged him from jaws he didn't see coming. They were tethered, whether he liked it or not, and the planet knew it. It toyed with them, bending reality to test their limits. Once they found a skeleton in the dirt, human, fresh, wearing Kale's uniform. He stared, heart hammering, until Syrah touched his shoulder. "It's not you," she said. "Not yet." The yet lingered, a promise and a threat. The air grew heavier as they pressed on, the forest thinning into a plateau of cracked stone. Ruins jutted from the ground, towers of black glass, etched with symbols that burned to look at. Syrah stopped short, her breath catching. "This is where it began," she murmured, and for the first time she seemed small, fragile. Kale scanned the horizon, unease coiling in his gut. Something moved in the distance. A shape too big, too wrong, sliding between the spires. His hand tightened on his weapon, but Syrah grabbed him, pulling him down behind a slab. "Don't," she hissed. "It sees what you see." Her fear was contagious, sinking into him like damp rot. Whatever was out there wasn't just alive. It was aware, deliberate, and it wanted them to know it. They hid there, pulses racing as the thing prowled closer. It didn't roar or charge. It waited, patient as stone, its presence pressing against their minds. Kale's head throbbed, flashes of memory, or something else, spilling in, faces he didn't know, battles he'd never fought, a voice whispering his name across centuries. Syrah clutched his arm, her nails digging in. "You feel it too," she said, not a question. He nodded, throat dry. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. They'd been drawn here, him with his impossible luck, her with her timeless sight, for a reason neither could escape. The planet wasn't just a prison, it was a stage, and they were the players in a game they didn't understand. The creature retreated, or seemed to, its shadow dissolving into the haze. But the tension didn't lift, it coiled tighter, promising more. Syrah stood, her jaw set, and pointed toward the ruins. "We have to go in," she said, her voice steady but laced with dread. Kale rose, every nerve alight, knowing she was right. Answers lay ahead, buried in the dark, but so did danger. older, deeper, and tied to them both in ways they couldn't yet see. The wind picked up, carrying a sound like distant laughter, and as they stepped toward the unknown, the ground pulsed beneath them, alive and waiting. Kale's boots crunched against the shattered stone as he and Syrah approached the ruins, the air growing colder with every step. The black glass towers loomed taller now, their surfaces reflecting distorted versions of themselves. His face stretched thin, her eyes multiplied into a dozen glowing orbs. The symbols carved into the structures seemed to writhe when he blinked, like they were trying to crawl into his skull. He shook it off, focusing on the weight of his sidearm, the rhythm of his breath, anything to anchor him. Syrah moved ahead, her posture tense but purposeful, as if she'd walked this path 1,000 times. "Stay close," she said, her voice cutting through the eerie hum that vibrated from the ground. He didn't argue. The plateau felt like a trap waiting to spring, and she was the only thing keeping it at bay. The first tower they reached wasn't a building, it was a shell, hollowed out and pulsing faintly, like a heart exposed to the air. Inside, the walls shimmered with veins of blue light, threading through the glass like blood vessels. Kale's skin prickled as he stepped over the threshold, the temperature dropping sharply. Syrah hesitated, her hand brushing the entrance, and for a split second he saw her flinch, actually flinch like something had bitten her. "What is it?" he asked, voice low. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the glowing veins, her expression unreadable. "This place holds echoes," she said finally, her tone distant. "Not all of them are dead." He wanted to press her, but a sound, like a sigh, deep and resonant, rolled through the chamber, and the hairs on his arms stood on end. They ventured deeper, the light shifting around them, casting shadows that didn't match their shapes. Kale's reflection in the glass showed him older, scarred, his eyes hollow. Then it was gone, replaced by a flicker of Syrah's face, younger, softer, before that too dissolved. The air buzzed with static, and he caught snippets of voices, his crew maybe calling his name or something mimicking them. "Draven, report," one shouted, sharp and urgent, only to fade into a garbled whine. He spun, searching the empty space, but Syrah grabbed his shoulder. "Don't listen," she warned. "It'll pull you apart." Her grip was steady, grounding him, and he nodded, swallowing the unease clawing up his throat. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just stone and light, it was alive, playing with their heads. The chamber opened into a vast hall, its ceiling lost in shadow, the floor a mosaic of cracked tiles that glowed faintly underfoot. In the center stood a structure, part altar, part machine, its surface slick with a liquid that wasn't water. It shimmered red, then gold, then black, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Syrah approached it slowly, her movements almost reverent, while Kale hung back, scanning the edges of the room. The walls here moved, subtly at first, then more noticeably, rippling like water disturbed by a stone. He blinked, and for a moment he saw faces pressing against the glass, human, alien, something in between, before they melted away. "Syrah," he said, voice tight, "what the hell is this?" She didn't turn, just kept staring at the altar thing. "A lock," she murmured, "or a door." Before he could ask what she meant, the ground trembled, and the liquid on the structure surged, spilling over the edges and pooling at her feet. She stepped back, but not fast enough. The stuff clung to her boots, climbing upward like it had a mind of its own. Kale lunged forward, yanking her away, and the liquid hissed, retreating as if offended. Her eyes met his, wide and searching, and for the first time he saw something like gratitude flicker there. "It knows us," she said, breathless. "It's testing us." He didn't like the sound of that, didn't like how the room seemed to tighten around them, the air growing thick with a pressure he couldn't name. "Testing us for what?" he demanded, but she shook her head, lips pressed tight. She didn't know, or wouldn't say. They pressed on, the hall stretching endlessly, its geometry bending in ways that hurt to look at. Corners folded into themselves, paths doubled back without reason, and once, Kale swore he saw his own silhouette ahead, walking away. Syrah stayed close now, her presence a tether as the ruins played their tricks. She started talking more, not explanations but fragments, like she was thinking aloud. "This wasn't built to keep something out," she said, tracing a symbol that pulsed under her touch. "It was built to keep something in." Her words hung heavy, and Kale's mind raced back to that shape on the plateau, the thing that watched without moving. Was that what she meant? Was it here, under their feet, waiting? The air shifted again, warmer now, carrying a scent like ozone and decay. They rounded a bend, or maybe the bend rounded them, and found themselves facing a wall of light, not solid but alive, shimmering with threads of color that wove and unwove themselves. Syrah stopped short, her breath hitching. "This is it," she whispered, and Kale felt it too, a pull deep in his chest like the light was calling him by name. He stepped forward, drawn in, but she grabbed his arm, her nails digging in. "Not yet," she said, her voice sharp. "You don't know what's on the other side." He pulled free, frustration boiling over. "Then tell me," he snapped. "Stop with the half answers. What am I doing here? What are you?" She stared at him, her eyes like storms, and for a moment he thought she'd walk away. But then she spoke, soft and deliberate. "You're a mistake," she said, "a flaw they didn't see coming. And I'm the one who remembers." His head spun. Whose mistake? What did she remember? But before he could demand more, the light flared, blinding them both. When it faded, they weren't in the hall anymore. They stood on a cliff, the edge dropping into a void that swallowed sound, the sky above a swirl of violet and black. The ruins were gone, replaced by a landscape of jagged rock and glowing fissures, the air crackling with energy. Kale's heart pounded as he took it in, the sheer wrongness of it all. Syrah moved beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon where something shimmered. A city, maybe, or a mirage, its spires twisting upward like smoke. "We're deeper now," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind that whipped around them. "It's pulling us in." He didn't need to ask what it was. He felt it, a presence, vast and patient, threading through the cracks of this place. The ground beneath them pulsed, and he noticed it then. His shadow didn't match his stance. It stretched longer, thinner, its edges fraying into tendrils that reached for Syrah's. She saw it too, her face paling, and for the first time he realized she was as lost as he was. They started moving again, no choice but to follow the pull, the cliff path winding downward into a canyon where the air grew dense, almost liquid. The rocks here glowed faintly, etched with the same symbols from the ruins, and Kale's skin tingled as they passed, like static but deeper, burrowing into his bones. Syrah's pace quickened, her breath shallow, and he caught her muttering under her breath, words he didn't recognize but felt in his gut. "You're tied to this," he said, half accusing, half pleading. She didn't deny it. "So are you," she shot back, and the truth of it hit him like a punch. His whole life, the missions, the survival, the way he'd always felt out of place. It wasn't random. It led here. The canyon opened into a basin, the ground slick with that same shifting liquid, reflecting a sky that wasn't there. In the center rose a spire, taller than the towers, its surface alive with motion, faces, hands, shapes pressing outward, then sinking back. Syrah froze, her hand hovering over her chest like she was holding something in. "It's awake," she said, and the air shuddered, a low rumble building from the spire. Kale's vision blurred, memories, not his, flooding in. A war in the stars, a betrayal, a scream that wasn't human. He staggered, clutching his head, and Syrah caught him, her touch burning. "Fight it," she hissed. "It wants you to break." He forced his eyes open, the spire looming closer. Or maybe they'd moved without realizing. The liquid at its base rippled, and something emerged. Not the creature from before, but a form, vague and shifting, human one moment, monstrous the next. It didn't speak, but its presence slammed into them, a weight of rage and sorrow and hunger. Syrah stepped forward, her voice rising in a chant that made the air tremble, and the thing paused, its edges flickering. Kale watched, breathless, as she faced it down, her body glowing faintly, tied to the planet in ways he couldn't fathom. But it wasn't enough. The form grew, stretching toward them, and the ground cracked, swallowing the light. They ran, the basin collapsing behind them, the spires hummed chasing them through the dark. Kale's lungs burned, his mind reeling, but Syrah kept him moving, her hand locked around his. The path twisted upward, the air thinning, and they burst onto a ridge overlooking a sea of mist, the spire's echo fading below. She released him, panting, her eyes wild. "It's not done," she said, and he knew she was right. Whatever they'd stirred was coming, and they were running out of places to hide. The mist below shifted, shapes moving within it, and Kale felt that pull again, stronger now, tugging at something deep inside him, something he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. Kale stood on the ridge, the wind clawing at his face, the mist below churning like a living thing. His chest heaved, every breath a fight against the thinning air, but his eyes stayed locked on the shifting shapes, too fluid, too deliberate to be random. Syrah crouched beside him, her silhouette sharp against the violet glow bleeding from the horizon. She wasn't panting anymore, her stillness unnerved him, like she'd flipped a switch and turned inward, listening to something he couldn't hear. "What are they?" he asked, nodding toward the mist. Her head tilted, just slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was low, threaded with a tension he hadn't heard before. "Pieces," she said. "Fragments of what was trapped here. They're not whole, not yet." He didn't like the yet part, didn't like how it hung there, heavy with promise. The ridge trembled beneath him, a faint pulse that synced with the ache in his skull. He rubbed his temples, flashes of those alien memories still lingering, blurred faces, burning skies, a name he couldn't catch. Sira noticed, her gaze flicking to him, sharp and assessing. "It's digging into you," she said, not unkindly. "The deeper we go, the more it'll take." He shot her a look, frustration bubbling up. "And you? What's it taking from you?" She didn't answer, just stood, brushing dirt from her hands like it was nothing. But he saw it, the faint tremor in her fingers, the way her eyes darted to the mist and back. She was holding something back and it was eating at her. They started down the slope, the mist rising to meet them, cool and damp against his skin. It wasn't just fog, it clung, thick and syrupy, whispering as it brushed past. Kale's hand tightened on his sidearm, useless as it was against shadows, but the weight felt good, real. Sira moved ahead, her steps sure even as the ground softened into something spongy, almost alive. The shapes in the mist grew clearer, limbs stretching too long, heads twisting at wrong angles, eyes that blinked out of sync. They didn't attack, didn't even approach, just drifted, watching. "They're waiting," Sira said, her voice cutting through the hum. "For what?" he pressed, but she only shook her head, her focus locked on a point he couldn't see. The mist parted suddenly, revealing a stretch of flat ground studded with crystalline pillars, each one glowing faintly, their surfaces etched with the same shifting symbols he'd seen in the ruins. The air here crackled, electric, and Kale felt it, a jolt through his spine like the planet was reaching inside him. Sira stopped, her breath catching, and he followed her gaze to the largest pillar, its light pulsing in time with the beat he felt in his chest. "It's you," she whispered, and he froze, her words sinking in slow and cold. "What do you mean, me?" he demanded, stepping closer. She turned to him, her eyes wide, almost pleading. "Your blood," she said. "It's waking them." He stared, mind racing, but before he could process it, the pillar flared, and the ground split open, a fissure snaking toward them. Sira shoved him aside, her strength startling, and they stumbled back as the mist rushed in, thicker now, carrying a sound like distant screams. The shapes sharpened, humanoid but wrong, their forms stitched together from light and shadow, mouths gaping in silent howls. Kale's pulse hammered as he scrambled to his feet, Sira already moving, pulling him toward the pillars. "Run!" she shouted, and he did, the ground buckling beneath them, the air alive with that awful keening. They wove through the crystals, the light bending around them, throwing their shadows into jagged spikes. The shapes followed, not fast but relentless, their edges bleeding into the mist like ink in water. Kale's lungs burned, his mind a tangle of questions. His blood? Waking what? But survival trumped everything else. Sira led them into a narrow pass, the pillars closing in, their glow dimming as the mist pressed tighter. She stopped abruptly, her hand slamming against a crystal, and it hummed, the sound rippling outward. The shapes hesitated, their forms flickering, and for a moment the air cleared, giving them a breath to think. What the hell was that? Kale rasped, leaning against the pillar, its surface warm under his palm. Sira didn't look at him, her focus on the crystal, her fingers tracing its edges. "They're drawn to you," she said, her voice steady but strained. "Something in you calls them." He laughed, short and bitter. "Great. Any idea why?" She met his gaze then, her expression unreadable. "You're not just human," she said, and the words hit him like a slap. He opened his mouth to argue, but the pillar pulsed again, and the mist surged, the shapes lunging forward with renewed hunger. They bolted, the pass opening into a cavern where the walls glittered with veins of that same blue light, weaving patterns that seemed to shift as they ran. Sira's pace faltered, her hand clutching her side, and Kale grabbed her arm, steadying her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough. She nodded, but her face was tight, pain etched in the lines around her eyes. "It's fighting me," she muttered, and he realized she didn't mean the shapes. She meant the planet, the connection she couldn't shake. He didn't let go, pulling her along as the cavern narrowed, the air growing hot, thick with a metallic tang. The shapes were closing in, their forms more solid now. Arms reaching, fingers clawing, eyes burning with a light that wasn't natural. Kale fired his sidearm, the shots crackling through the mist, and one of the things shuddered, dissolving into sparks. But there were more, too many, and the cavern shook, rocks tumbling from above. Sira yanked him sideways into a crevice barely wide enough to fit, and they pressed against the wall, the shapes clawing at the entrance. Her breathing was ragged, her skin glowing faintly, and he saw it then, thin lines of light threading from her into the rock, like she was bleeding into it. "They won't stop," she said, her voice hoarse. "Not as long as you're here." He glared at her, anger flaring. "Then tell me what I am. Stop dancing around it." She flinched, but her eyes didn't waver. "You're a bridge," she said, "between what they were and what they want to be." He stared, the words sinking in heavy and impossible. "A bridge? To what?" Before he could push her, the crevice rumbled, and the shapes forced their way in, their light searing the dark. And here's where things start unraveling. Kale isn't just surviving, he's part of something bigger, a design he never asked for. But what would you do if you suddenly learned you were engineered to be the key to something ancient and dangerous? Would you try to unlock it, or run from it? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Would you trust someone like Sira, or are her riddles too much of a red flag? If you're hooked and want to see where this mind-bending journey leads, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories that pull you into the unknown. This is just the beginning. They scrambled deeper, the passage twisting downward, the walls closing in until they were crawling, the heat unbearable. Sira's glow flickered, her strength fading, and Kale half carried her, his own body screaming in protest. The shapes were behind them, their whispers filling his head, names, pleas, threats, all jumbled together. He gritted his teeth, shoving the noise out, and they burst into a chamber, the floor smooth and black, the ceiling a dome of pulsing light. In the center stood a pool, its surface mirror flat, reflecting not them but a sky full of stars he didn't recognize. Sira collapsed to her knees, her hands trembling as she stared at the pool. "It's a gate," she said, her voice barely audible. "Or a grave." Kale knelt beside her, his mind spinning. "A gate to where?" he asked, but she didn't answer, just pointed at the pool where the stars were shifting, forming a shape, a helix spiraling tight, then unraveling. He felt it again, that pull in his chest, stronger now, tugging him toward the water. His hand moved without thinking, reaching out, and Sira grabbed his wrist, her grip weak but desperate. "Don't," she whispered. "Not yet." The shapes poured in behind them, their light flooding the chamber, and the pool rippled, the helix tightened. Kale's head throbbed, more memories, not his, spilling through. A lab, a scream, a hand pressing a vial to his skin. He yanked his arm free, staring at Sira, realization dawning. "They did something to me," he said, his voice shaking, "before I was born." She nodded, slow and solemn. "You're their key," she said, "and I'm their lock." The shapes surged, their forms merging into something vast, and the pool erupted, light spilling upward, pulling them both toward whatever lay beyond. The light from the pool surged upward, a column of blinding brilliance that swallowed the chamber, and Kale felt his feet lift from the ground, the pull in his chest now a roar he couldn't ignore. Sira clung to his arm, her weight the only thing keeping him from tumbling into the void, her glow dimming as the energy tore at them both. The shapes, or whatever they'd become, melted into the light, their whispers turning into a single deafening hum that rattled his bones. He squinted against the glare, the helix in the pool spinning faster, its edges fraying into threads that reached for him like fingers. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice nearly lost in the chaos. But Sira's grip tightened, her nails digging into his skin as if she could anchor them both. The air twisted, hot and sharp, and for a moment he saw it, not just light, but a window, a glimpse of something beyond, a vast expanse of fractured stars, ships frozen mid-flight, a horizon that bent inward like a shattered mirror. It wasn't a place, it was a tear, a wound in reality, and it wanted him. His head pounded, those alien memories clawing deeper. A sterile room, hands in gloves, a voice saying, "He'll carry it whether he knows or not." He gasped, the pieces clicking into place. His reflexes, his survival, the way he'd always felt a part. It wasn't luck, it was design. Sira's words echoed in his skull, "You're their key," and he realized she wasn't just talking about the shapes. Something bigger had planned this, something that had stitched him into its web long before he'd ever boarded Argos 9. The light pulsed, dragging them closer, and Sira's glow flickered, her strength fading fast. "We can't stay here," she yelled, her voice raw, and he saw the strain in her face, the way her body trembled against the pull. She was fighting it, fighting the planet, the light, maybe even herself, and losing. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her back from the edge of the pool, his boots scraping against the slick floor. "Then where?" he shouted, desperation creeping in. She pointed upward, toward the dome, where the light bent and cracked, revealing slivers of shadow. "There's a way out," she said, coughing as the air thickened, "but it'll cost us." He didn't ask what she meant, there wasn't time. The hum intensified, the helix tightening into a knot, and the chamber shook, cracks spiderwebbing across the walls. The shapes were gone, absorbed into the light, but their presence lingered, a weight pressing down, urging him to let go, to fall in. He fought it, every muscle screaming, and hauled Sierra toward the dome, her steps faltering but her eyes fixed on the shadows above. The pool erupted again, tendrils of light lashing out, and one grazed his leg, searing through his suit like acid. He stumbled, pain flaring, but Sierra caught him, her touch cool against the burn. "Move," she hissed, and they pushed forward, the dome looming closer. The cracks widened as they reached it, the light bending around them, and Cale saw it, a gap, narrow and jagged, leading into darkness. He didn't know what was on the other side, didn't care. Anything was better than being swallowed by the pool. Sierra climbed first, her movements sluggish but determined, and he followed, the edge cutting into his palms as he pulled himself up. The hum chased them, the light surging below, and he felt it again. That pull, tugging at something deep inside, something he couldn't name but couldn't shake. He glanced back, the helix now a pulsing core, and for a split second he saw his own face staring up from it, eyes wide and empty. They tumbled through the gap, landing hard on a surface that felt like glass, cold and smooth. The light dimmed behind them, the hum fading to a dull throb, and Cale rolled onto his back, chest heaving, staring at a ceiling that shimmered like oil. Sierra lay beside him, her breathing shallow, her glow nearly gone. "We're not out," she murmured, her voice barely audible. He sat up, wincing as his leg throbbed, and took in their surroundings. A vast, circular chamber, its walls lined with panels that pulsed faintly, each one etched with symbols that seemed to shift when he looked away. The air was still, too still, and the silence pressed against his ears, heavy and unnatural. He helped Sierra to her feet, her weight leaning into him, and they moved toward the nearest panel. It flared at their approach, projecting a haze of light that coalesced into a map, or something like it. Lines twisted and looped, planets spun in erratic orbits, and at the center, a single point glowed brighter than the rest. "Dara V," Sierra said, her tone flat but her eyes narrowing. "But not the one we know." He frowned, studying the map, the way it flickered and rewrote itself. "What does that mean?" he asked, but she shook her head, her hand hovering over the panel. "This place, it's a hub," she said, "a knot in the threats, and we're tangled in it." The panel pulsed, and the map shifted, zooming in on that central point until it wasn't a planet anymore. It was a structure, massive and spiraling, its edges blurring into the void. Cale's stomach dropped. It looked like the spire from the basin, but bigger, alive in a way that made his skin crawl. "That's where we're going," Sierra said, not a question but a statement, and he felt the truth of it in his gut. Whatever had started this, whatever had marked him, bound him to her, was there waiting. He touched the panel, and it reacted, the light flaring under his fingers, the map redrawing itself in sharper detail. His breath caught. There in the structure's core was a pattern, faint but unmistakable. A helix identical to the one in his blood. Sierra saw it too, her face tightening. "They built you for this," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "And me to find you." He turned to her, anger and fear colliding. "Oh, who did this?" She didn't answer, just stared at the map, her expression a mix of resignation and defiance. The chamber rumbled, the panels flickering, and a sound, like footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed from the dark. They weren't alone. Cale drew his sidearm, the weight steadying him, and Sierra stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. "We need to move," she said, her glow sparking back to life, faint but fierce. They followed the map's path, the chamber stretching into a tunnel, its walls smooth and reflective, throwing their distorted images back at them. The footsteps grew louder, a rhythm that didn't match their own, and Cale's nerves tightened, every shadow a threat. Sierra stayed close, her presence a quiet strength, but he saw the toll it was taking, her steps heavier, her glow stuttering. "You're fading," he said, keeping his voice low. She didn't deny it. "It's the cost," she replied, cryptic as ever, and he wanted to shake her, to demand the full story, but the tunnel trembled and the footsteps stopped. A figure emerged ahead, not a shape from the mist, but something solid, tall, its form cloaked in shadow that didn't quite fit. It didn't move, just stood there watching, and Cale felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. Sierra tensed, her hand clenching into a fist, and the figure tilted its head, a gesture almost human but wrong in its slowness. "It knows us," she whispered, echoing her words from the ruins, and Cale's grip tightened on his weapon. The figure didn't speak, didn't advance, but the tunnel shifted, the walls bending inward, the reflections warping until he saw not himself but versions. older, younger, broken, whole, staring back. The figure raised a hand and the map flared behind them, the helix spinning faster, the structure looming larger. Kale's head throbbed, more memories spilling in, a voice cold and precise saying, "He'll open it one way or another." He staggered, Sira catching him, her touch grounding him again. "Fight it," she said, her voice fierce, and he nodded, shoving the noise out. The figure stepped closer, its shadow stretching and the tunnel pulsed, the air alive with static. They didn't wait. Kale fired, the shot crackling through the dark, and the figure dissolved, only to reform a heartbeat later, closer now, its presence a weight they couldn't shake. They ran, the tunnel twisting upward, the map's light guiding them toward the structure, the helix burning in his mind. Sira's glow flared, pushing back the shadow, but it cost her. She stumbled, blood trickling from her nose, and Kale pulled her along, refusing to let her fall. The figure followed, silent and relentless, and the tunnel opened into a platform, the structure rising before them, massive and alive, its surface rippling like water. The helix pulsed at its core, calling him, and Kale felt it. Whatever he was, whatever they'd made him to be, it was here, waiting to be unlocked. The platform stretched out before them, a slab of gleaming black stone that seemed to float above an abyss, the structure towering overhead like a monolith carved from the void itself. Its surface shimmered, liquid and solid at once, the helix at its core pulsing in time with Kale's heartbeat, a rhythm he couldn't escape. Sira leaned against him, her breathing shallow, her glow flickering like a candle in a storm. The figure lingered behind them, its shadow pooling at the tunnel's mouth, not advancing but not retreating either, just watching, patient and inevitable. Kale's hand trembled on his sidearm, the barrel still warm from the shot that hadn't mattered. "What now?" he asked, his voice rough, eyes darting between Sira and the structure. She straightened, wincing as she pulled away from him, her gaze locked on the helix. "We go in," she said, her tone flat but resolute, like she'd known this was coming all along. He stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "In there?" he said, nodding at the structure, its surface rippling with a life of its own. "You said I'm a key. What happens when I open it?" She met his eyes, hers dark and steady despite the strain etching her face. "We find out what they wanted," she replied, "what they hid." He wanted to argue, to demand more, but the platform quaked, a low groan rising from the abyss, and the figure's shadow stretched closer, its edges fraying into tendrils that clawed at the air. There was no turning back. Kale felt it in his bones, a pull stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. He took a step toward the structure, Sira matching his pace, her presence a quiet anchor even as she faltered. The surface parted as they approached, not a door but a wound, peeling back to reveal a chamber bathed in soft, violet light. The air inside hummed, thick with a charge that made his skin tingle, and the helix loomed larger now, suspended in the center, its threads weaving and unweaving in a dance he couldn't follow. He stopped short, the sight hitting him like a punch, beautiful, terrifying, and somehow familiar, like a memory he'd never lived. Sira moved past him, her hand brushing the air near the helix, and it reacted, flaring brighter, the light spilling over her like water. "It's alive," she murmured, almost to herself, and Kale saw it too, the way the threads pulsed, not random but deliberate, responding to her, to him. He stepped closer, the pull in his chest tightening, and the helix shifted, its core splitting open to reveal a void within, a darkness that swallowed the light around it. His breath caught, a flood of images crashing through his mind, planets burning, voices chanting, a hand pressing something into his blood, something that wasn't human. He staggered, clutching his head, and Sira grabbed his arm, her touch steadying him. "You're seeing it," she said, her voice low. "What they did." "What am I?" he rasped, the question tearing out of him, raw and desperate. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. "A weapon," she said, her words cutting deep. "Or a cure." They didn't know which. He stared at her, the helix's light casting shadows across her face, and the truth settled in, cold and heavy. Something, had engineered him, woven him into this, and Sira was the only one who could read the code. The chamber trembled, the void in the helix expanding, and a sound, like a sigh, deep and ancient, rolled through the space, shaking the walls. The figure appeared at the entrance, its form sharper now, less shadow and more substance, its edges glinting like fractured glass. It didn't speak, but its presence pressed against them, a force that bent the air, urging them toward the void. Kale's hand tightened on his weapon, but Sira stepped forward, her glow flaring despite her weakness. "Stay back," she said, not to him but to the figure, her voice carrying a weight he hadn't heard before. The figure paused, its head tilting, and for a moment the chamber stilled, the helix's hum softening. "It's not here for us," she whispered, glancing at Kale. "It's here for what's inside." Before he could ask, the void pulsed and the air ripped open, a wave of energy slamming into them. Kale hit the ground, his vision swimming, and Syrah fell beside him, her glow snuffed out. The helix spun faster, the void spilling outward, and shapes emerged. Not the mist creatures, but something else, taller, broader, their forms cloaked in light that burned to look at. They didn't move like the shadows. They strode, purposeful and silent, their eyes, too many, too bright, fixing on Kale. He scrambled to his feet, pulling Syrah up, her body limp but her grip fierce. "What are they?" he shouted, the noise swallowed by the growing roar of the void. "Guardians," she said, coughing, blood staining her lips. "Or keepers. They've been waiting." The figures circled them, not attacking but closing in, their light searing the air. Kale fired, the shots sparking against their forms, but they didn't falter, just tightened the ring, driving them toward the void. Syrah pushed against him, her strength returning in a flicker, and she raised a hand, her voice rising in that strange chant. The figures hesitated, their light dimming, and the void shuddered, contracting for a heartbeat before surging again, stronger, hungrier. "We can't fight them," she said, her eyes wild, and Kale saw the truth in her face. They weren't meant to win, not here, not like this. The helix was the key and he was its trigger, but what it opened wasn't clear. Not yet. He grabbed her, pulling her back from the void, and they ran, the guardians following, their steps shaking the chamber. The walls cracked, light bleeding through, and the figure at the entrance moved, its form splitting into two, then three, shadows multiplying as the void grew. Kale's mind raced. Weapon or cure, she'd said, but for what? For this? They reached the far wall, the surface parting again, and they stumbled into a corridor, narrow and twisting, the light dimming behind them. The guardians didn't follow, but their presence lingered, a pressure at their backs. Syrah leaned against the wall, her breathing ragged, her glow gone entirely. "They're not done," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They'll wait for you." He knelt beside her, his own strength fraying, and checked her pulse, weak but there. "Why me?" he asked, softer this time, the fight draining out of him. She smiled, faint and bitter. "Because you're the flaw," she said, "the one they couldn't predict." The corridor stretched ahead, dark and silent, but the air hummed, a promise of more to come. Kale helped her up, his leg throbbing, his mind a tangle of half-answers. The helix's pull lingered, a thread tied to his core, and he knew they couldn't stop. Not now, not with the guardians behind them and the void still hungry. They moved forward, the shadows deepening, and the walls began to glow again, faint at first, then brighter, revealing carvings, not symbols but scenes. Wars, machines, a figure like him standing over a broken world. Syrah saw it too, her breath catching, and they stopped, staring at the story etched into the stone. "It's not just you," she said, her voice trembling. "It's us." The carving shifted, the lines redrawing themselves, and Kale saw her, a woman like Syrah, glowing, reaching for a man like him, the helix binding them together. The air tightened, the hum returning, and the corridor shook, dust raining down. Something was coming, something bigger than the guardians, older than the void, and they were running out of time. Kale pulled her along, the carvings fading behind them, but the image burned in his mind. Two figures, locked in a dance they couldn't escape, with the universe hanging in the balance. The story is over, or is it just beginning? When the unknown reveals itself, there's always another layer waiting. If you're into stories like this, intense, mysterious, and full of twists, the next video is made for you. Click over and keep the journey going.